Okay, well, here we are again. Already having technical difficulties. Like, it's crashing OBS a minute as soon as I put the start stream button. And now I'm not getting any audio feedback. So I usually have it set so that I can monitor, but monitor is not working. So I'll be hearing playback through the actual stream, but I'm not hearing anything through OBS. And of course, for some reason, it's got two different versions of OBS open right now. Because that's just what my computer likes to do to me. I can think it's the fairies are not respecting me having the fairy light turned on. Because they're not supposed to cause trouble when I have the light on. They're supposed to focus on the light. And the nice blue flickering that it does. But we are here. We are abnormal. OBS swears it's not dropping any frames. Which I will believe a lot more. I just waited the entire time before I'd say that. Just for time reference, I will say something like now, and then respond to now when I hear it. Now I heard now, the first time. But anyway, it is Fairy Tale Night, and we are going to do more Hans Christian Andersen. Let's get there, Firefly. It's more a technical issue on my end, because I'm not getting the monitor, I'm just getting the output. So I'm getting delayed on everything that I say. So if I'm slow to responding for anything, that's kind of why. Anyway. We're going back into Hans Andersen's fairy tales. And we get to start out with one that's usually linked up with Christmas. Okay. Cooking lag, I know that was. I decided to cook about 20 minutes before I started stream. I'm glad I finished eating. But yes, our first story for this fabulous Friday Night of Fairy Tales, The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Once upon a time, there were 25 tin soldiers, and they all looked like brothers, for they had been made in the same old tin spoon. Their uniforms were splendid in red and blue. They carried muskets in their arms, and they held themselves very upright, and even in their narrow box they lay straight, one next to the other, and waited. The first word they heard in this world, when the lid was taken off their box, was "Tin soldiers!" And so they knew exactly who they were. It was a little boy who said this, clapping his hands at the same time. He had been given these 25 tin soldiers because it was his birthday, and now he took them from their box and set them out on the table. The soldiers resembled each other to the hair. Only one was rather different from the rest. He had but one leg. You see, he had been made last when there was not enough tin left. However, he stood just as firmly on his one leg as the others did upon their two. And it is this one-legged tin soldier whose fortunes seem to us worthy to be recorded. The little boy had set out his tin soldiers on the table. On it there were several other playthings, but the most charming of them all was a little pasteboard castle. In front of the castle there stood some tiny trees, clustering around a little mirror intended to represent a lake, and waxen swans swam on the lake and were reflecting on the surface. This was lovely. Through the open windows one could look into the rooms, and if you bent very low and got near the windows, your breath made the casements move and the little trees rustle. The prettiest thing of all was a little damsel standing in the open doorway of the castle. She, too, was cut out of pasteboard, and she wore a green frock of the clearest muslin, with a sparkling rose and a ribbon which flung across her shoulders like a scarf. She stretched out both arms and raised one of her legs. You see, she was a dancer, so high in the air that the tin soldier could not see it, and thought that she, like him, only had one leg. That would be just the wife for me, he thought. But she is probably rather too high rank, for she lives in a castle, and I only live in a box which I have to share with my 24 brothers. That is not the right place for her, but I would like to get acquainted with her. And so he stationed himself behind the snuff-box that stood on the table. From this place he had a full view of the delicate little lady, and he would keep watching her without himself being seen. She still remained standing on one leg, without losing her balance. When evening came and the little boy had to go to bed, all the other 10 soldiers were put away in the box. Only the one, the 25th, remained lying behind his box. When the people in the house had gone to bed, toys in their turn began to play. They pretended to visit, to fight battles, to give balls, and they made a great noise. The 10 soldiers rattled in their box, for they wanted to play too, but the lid would not come off. The nutcracker cut capers, the slate pencil screeched across the slate. There was such a noise that the canary woke up and began to talk too, but he always talked in verse. The only two who did not move from their places were the tin soldier and the little dancer. She constantly remained in her graceful position, standing at the point of her foot, her arms outstretched, and he stood just as firmly on his one leg, never for one moment turning his eyes away from her. 12 o'clock struck. Crash! The lid of the snuff-box sprang open, but there was no snuff inside. Out jumped a little black jack-in-the-box. "Tin soldier!" he shouted. "Keep your eyes off what does not concern you!" But the tin soldier pretended not to hear. "Well, you wait till tomorrow," said the jack, and jumped about with glee, as though he were looking forward to tomorrow. The next morning, when the little boy had got up, he took the tin soldier and placed him on the window ledge, and nobody will ever know whether it was a draft or a little jack-in-the-box, but the window flew open, and out fell the tin soldier, head foremost from the third story to the ground. A dreadful fall it was. His one leg turned over and over in the air, and at last he came to rest poised on a soldier's cap, with a bayonet between the paving stones. A maidservant and the little boy immediately came down to look for him, but although they were very near to trod on him, they could not see him. If only he had been able to call out, "Here I am!" they might have easily found him. But he thought it would not be seemly for him to shout, because he was in uniform. And now it began to rain. Every drop fell heavier than the last. It was a real downpour. The boy and the maidservant ran back into the house, and the tin soldier remained lying in the street. When the rain was over, two urchins came by. "Look," said one, "there's a tin soldier. We should put him in a ship and let him sail away." So they made a boat out of an old newspaper and placed the tin soldier into it, and away he sailed down the gutter, both boys running along by the side, clapping their hands. The paper boat rocked to and fro, and every now and then veered round so quickly that the tin soldier became quite giddy. And the waves there were, and the current. That was on account of the heavy rain. The tin soldier was afraid, but he did not move a muscle. He looked straight before him and held his bayonet tightly clasped. All at once the boat sailed under a long gutter board, and it was dark here as home in his own box. "I wonder where I am going," thought the little tin soldier. "To be sure, this is all the little jack-in-the-box is doing. Yet if the little maiden were sailing here with me, I would not mind, even if it were twice as dark." Just then a big water rat that lived under the long gutter board darted out. "Have you got a password?" replied the rat. "Then show it to me immediately." But the tin soldier was silent and held his weapon with a still firmer grasp. You see, he did not have a passport. The boat sailed on and the rat followed. He furiously showed his teeth and showed out the sticks and straws in the gutter. "Stop him! Stop him! He has not paid the toll! He has not shown his passport!" But the current grew stronger and stronger, and the little ship broke in the sticks and straws that had helped to halt it, and the tin soldier could already catch a glimpse of the bright daylight where the gutter board came to an end. But at the same time he heard a roaring noise at which the boldest heart might well have trembled, for where the tunnel ended, the water of the gutter fell steeply into a big canal. This was as dangerous for the tin soldier as it would have been for us were we to sail down a mighty waterfall. He was now so close that he could not stop. The boat darted forward, and the poor tin soldier held himself as stiff and immovable as possible. No one should accuse him of ever having blinked an eyelid. Twice the boat spun around and round, and it was filled with water to the brim, and it began to sink. Soon the tin soldier stood in the water up to his neck. The paper dissolved, and the water closed over his head. He thought of the pretty little dancer whom he would never see again, and these words rang out in his ear. "Wild adventure, mortal danger, be your fate, O valiant stranger." Ematsu. And with that the paper came completely asunder. The tin soldier fell into the foaming vortex, and immediately he was swallowed up by a large flesh-eating fish. It was terribly dark in there, worse than even the gutter board, and narrower than the box with the 24 other tin soldiers. But the tin soldier's resolution was as constant as ever. There he lay at full length, shouldering his arms. The fish turned and twisted about and made the strangest movements. At last he became quite still. It was as though a flash of lightning had darted through him. Suddenly daylight shone through brightly, and a voice called out, "The tin soldier!" The fish had been caught and taken to market, where the maidservants had brought him and taken him home. In the kitchen, they had cut up the belly with a large knife, and there was a tin soldier, straight as a dart, and looking like a much-traveled man. "This is amazing," said the maid. She seized the tin soldier by the middle of her two fingers and carried him out to the parlor, where everyone was eager to see the man who had traveled in the maw of a fish. They put him on the table, and there, how could anything so extraordinary happen in the world? The tin soldier was in the same room in which he had been before. There were the same children, the same toys stood on the table. There was the beautiful castle with the pretty little dancing maiden who was still standing on one leg, while she held the other quite high up in the air. It quite affected the tin soldier. He could have wept 10 tears, but such weakness would have been unbecoming in a soldier. He looked at her, and she looked at him, but neither spoke a word. Just at that moment, the little boy took the tin soldier and threw him into the stove, without reason or rhyme. That is what little boys are like. But perhaps it was the fault of the wicked little jack-in-the-box. The tin soldier now stood in a blaze of red light. The heat, of course, was dreadful. Whether the heat was the result of the actual fire or the flames of love within him, he did not know. He had entirely lost his lovely colors. Nobody can say whether this change had happened during his travels, or was the effect of strong emotion. He looked upon the little lady, and she looked upon him. He felt that he was melting, but constant as ever, he stood still, shouldering his arms. Suddenly a door was opened, and a draught seized the dancer. Like a swift she flew straight into the stove to the tin soldier, flared up into a blaze, and was gone. Now the tin soldier had lost his wish to live. He melted into a hard lump. The next morning, when the maidservant took the ashes out of the grate, she found therein a little tin heart. That was all that remained of him. Of the pretty dancer, however, all that remained was a tiny sparkling rose that had adorned her shoulder, and that was burnt to a cinder. Welcome, Matsu. I'm having to go by the audio from the stream because I apparently can't hear my monitoring system. But the Tin Soldier was a birthday present, not a Christmas present. The next story, also kind of a funny one. Clumsy Hans. Deep in the heart of the country there is an old manor house. The squire lived there with his two sons, who considered themselves to be so clever. Even had they only been half as bright, it would have been ample. They wanted to try for a hand of the king's daughter, for she had publicly announced that she would take for a husband the young man who would be able to express his thoughts most lucidly. For a whole week the two sons prepared themselves for this task. One of them learned the whole of the Latin dictionary by heart, and on top of it 3 annual volumes of the town's paper. And he could recite all that forward and backward as his examiner pleased. The other had interested himself in the laws of the craftsmen's guilds, and knew by heart what every guild leader would have to know. He did this because he thought such knowledge would enable him to have a say in the affairs of state. Besides, he was very clever with his hands. He could embroider garments with roses and other flowers. "The king's daughter is mine," they both said, and their father gave each of them a splendid horse. The one who knew the dictionary and the newspaper was given a black horse. The law expert received a milk-white mare. The two young men were smeared their mouths with cod liver oil to make their lips pliable. All the servants assembled in the yard to see the brothers depart. Just then their third brother came along, for the squire had 3 sons, but that one never counted for much because he was not so knowledgeable as the others. They called him Clumsy Hans. "Where are you two off to?" asked Clumsy Hans. "You're wearing your Sunday best." "We're going to the king's court to apply for the hand of the king's daughter by talking. Don't you know what has been publicly announced all over the country?" "Jolly good, I'll come with you," exclaimed Clumsy Hans, but the brothers only laughed and rode away. "Father," said Clumsy Hans, "I have to have a horse. I want to get married. If she will have me, why, she will get me. If she does not want me, I shall get her just the same." "Don't think of such nonsense," replied the father. "I'm not going to give you a horse. You cannot talk. You do not know how to express your thoughts. Your brothers are quite different." "All right," said Clumsy Hans. "If I cannot have a horse, I will take the he-goat. He is mine and able to carry me." No sooner had he said this than he mounted the goat, dug his heels in, and sped away. And he raced along the great highway as if ridden by a storm. "Hey ho, here I come!" Clumsy Hans shouted and sang so that it echoed far and wide. Meanwhile, the brothers were traveling at a much slower pace. They did not speak to each other. They were thinking. They were rehearsing in their minds all the smart and clever things they were going to say. Every point had to be thought out most carefully. "Hey!" shouted Clumsy Hans. "Here I am. Just have a look and see what I found on the highway." And he showed them a dead crow, which he had picked up. "Clumsy fellow," said the brothers. "What do you think you are going to do with it?" "With the crow? Well, I'm going to give it to the princess." "Yeah, you do that." They laughed and rode on. "Hey, here I am again. Look what I've found now. It's not every day that you find that on the highway." The brothers turned around to see what else he could have found now. "Clumsy fellow," they snorted again. "That is an old clog without its uppers. What, are you going to make a present of this too to the king's daughter?" "Of course I'm going to," replied Clumsy Hans, and his brothers laughed and rode on. This time they got well ahead of him. "Hey, here I am again!" shouted Clumsy Hans. "It is getting better and better. This is capital." "What have you found now?" asked his brothers. "Something wonderful," boasted Clumsy Hans. "I can hardly tell you. The king's daughter will be delighted." "Why," said the brothers, and shook with nausea, "that is plain mud taken from the ditch." "Yes, of course it is," admitted Clumsy Hans, "and it is mud of the finest quality. It is so thin that it runs through your fingers." And he filled his pockets with mud. But the brothers galloped on a pace that made the gravel in the road shoot up. This is how they managed to arrive at the city gate more than an hour before Clumsy Hans. There the applicants were issued with numbers. They were all lined up 6 in a row and packed so tightly that they could not even move their arms. That was a very wise arrangement, because otherwise they would have knocked and pushed those in front of them. The other people accumulated in front of the palace to watch the princes receiving the visitors. As soon, however, as the suitor had taken into the royal reception hall, his power of speech left him completely. "This one is no good," said the princess with a shout. "Throw him out." At last it was that brother's turn who knew the dictionary by heart, forward and backward. But he had completely forgotten everything. The ceiling of the reception hall was made of mirrors, so that he saw himself standing upside down. At each window there were 3 clerks and 1 foreman clerk. They had to take down every word that was spoken so that it could be published in the newspaper the very same day. The paper could be bought in the street corner for a penny, and this was bound to intimidate the suitors. Also, the floorboards creaked and the stove was heated to such a degree that the air was stifling. "It's terribly hot in here," said the suitor. "True," said the king's daughter, "but my father was frying chickens today." Well, there he stood like a sheep. He had not reckoned with that sort of conversation. He did not know what to say. He had meant to be so clever and witty, but now he could not think of anything. "He is no good," said the princess. "Throw him out." And so he had to leave. Okay, congrats on getting first guilty. Now it was the other brother's turn. "How hot it is in here," he said. "True, we're frying chickens today," replied the princess. What?" he stammered, and all the clerks quickly wrote down. What, "He is no good," said the princess. "Throw him out." Now it was the turn of Clumsy Hans. He rode into the reception hall on his goat. "What a terrible heat," he said. "True, I'm frying chickens today," answered the princess. "Well, that's fine," replied Clumsy Hans. "In that case, I'll fry my crow with your chickens." "We can do that," said the princess. "But had you got anything to fry it in? I've neither a pot nor a saucepan." "Oh, that's no trouble," said Clumsy Hans. "I've got a cooking vessel and a vessel made of tin." And with that, he produced an old clog and put the crow into it. "That will be a fine dish," said the princess. "But where are we to get the soup from?" "I've got some in my pocket," said Clumsy Hans. "There's such a lot of it, I can even throw some away." And with that, he put his hand in his pocket and flung out a little mud. "I like that fellow," laughed the king's daughter. "You seem to be the only one who can speak and answer when asked. I would like to have you as my husband. But are you aware that every single word and everything you are saying now is being put down in writing in the newspaper tomorrow for everyone to read? Do you see there are 3 clerks sitting in every window and an old foreman clerk? Now that old foreman clerk is worse of them because he simply does not understand anything." She had said that solely to frighten Clumsy Hans. The clerk were highly amused and laughed, and each of them made an ink stain on the parquet floor. "So there are people who influence public opinion!" exclaimed Clumsy Hans. "All right, then the foreman clerk shall have the best of all." And he turned his pocket inside out and threw all the mud at the foreman clerk's face. "Well done!" the princess approved. "I should not have dared to do that, but I shall learn." Clumsy Hans became king and got a wife and a crown and sat on the throne. We know all that from the newspapers, but mind, you cannot always rely on them. Thank you for the drink. See, princesses have a sense of humor in some stories. And thank you for the work. Our next story for the night: The Top and the Ball. A top and a ball were lying close together in a drawer among other playthings. Said the top to the ball, "Why should we not become bride and bridegroom, since we are both thrown so much together?" But the ball, who was made of Morocco leather, fancied herself a very fashionable young lady, and would not hear of such a proposal. The next day, the little boy whom the playthings belonged to came to the door. He painted the top red and yellow and drove a brass nail through the middle of it. After that, he was glorious to see his top spin around. "Just look at me now," said the top to the ball. "What do you think of me? Why shouldn't we become husband and wife? We would suit each other so well. You can jump and I can spin, and it would be hard to find a couple happier than we should be." "That is what you think," said the ball. "But perhaps you do not know that my father and mother wore Morocco slippers, and that I have a cork in my body." "Well, yes, but I'm made of mahogany," returned the top. "The Lord Mayor himself made me with his own hands. He's got a lathe and took great pleasure in turning me." "Can I really believe that?" asked the ball. "May I never be whipped again if I uttered a lie," said the top solemnly. "You sound convincing," replied the ball, "but I'm afraid I am not really at liberty to get engaged to you. I am as good as betrothed to a young swallow. Whenever I fly up in the air, he puts his head out of his nest and asks, 'Will you marry me?' I have said yes to him in my heart, and that is almost as good as betrothal. But one thing I promise you, I will never forget you." "That will be of great use to me," said the top, and no more was he then said on the subject. The next day the ball was taken out. The top saw her fly like a bird into the air, so high that she could no longer be seen. She did come back again, but every time she touched the ground she sprang higher than before. Either her love for the young swallow or the cork she had in her body must have been the cause of this. The ninth time she did not return. The boy looked for her everywhere, but she had gone. "I can imagine where she is," said the top. "She's in the swallow's nest celebrating her wedding." The more the top thought of it, the more lovable did the ball appear to him. That she could not be his only made his love the more intense. Somebody else had been preferred to him. He could never forget that. And the top spun and hummed as he was thinking of the dear ball, who in his imagination grew more beautiful every moment. Thus passed several years, and there was within him an unbroken, constant love. The top now was no longer young. However, one fine day he was gilded all over. Never before had he looked so handsome. It had now become a golden top, and he spun around most sturdily, humming all the time. That indeed was an achievement. One fine day he sprang too high, and he was gone. They looked and looked for him everywhere, even in the cellar, but they could not find him. Where had he got to? He had jumped into a large basket full of all sorts of rubbish, and cabbage stalks, sweepings, ashes, dust, old paper, and dirt that had fallen down from the gutters. "Well, here I am now," he thought. "My gay gilding will soon be spoiled, and what sort of beggar folk can I have fallen in with?" And he peeped balefully at the long cabbage stalk which lay unpleasantly near him, and at the strange round thing, somewhat like an apple, like a very old, ugly apple. But the thing was not an apple. It was an old ball which had been lying in the gutter for several years, and was completely soaked through with water. "Oh, goodness, I've found an eagle with whom I can have a conversation," said the ball, looking fixed at the gilded top. "I am made of real Morocco leather, and was sewn together by a young lady's delicate hands, and I have cork in my body, and I shall never again be noticed by anybody." "But I shall never again be noticed by anybody. I was on the point of marriage with a swallow when I fell into the gutter. There I have lain for 5 long years, and now I am wet through and through. Only think what a wearisome thing for a young lady, a bride to be in such a situation. The top did not answer a single word. He thought of his long lamented lady love, and the more he heard, the more certain he felt that this was she. The maid now came to turn the basket over. "Oh!" she exclaimed. "There is our good Top!" And the Top was taken back to the playroom. He was used and admired as before. No notice was taken of the ball, nor did the Top ever think again of his love for her. Such a feeling passes away when the object of one's love has been lying in the gutter for 5 years and has been soaked through with water. Ouch. That was kind of harsh. Something tells me it's a bit of a self insert. Because, son of a nobleman, not supposed to, son of rich family, well, daughter of rich family. She gets essentially cast out and forgotten and suffers deals and hardships, and yeah. Anyway, hopefully the next happier story. Probably not. It sounds Christian Andersen. Little Ida's flowers. "Look how faded my poor flowers are," said little Ida. "Only yesterday they were so pretty, and now they are all drooping. I wonder why." The little girl held out a bunch of tired, colorless flowers to the student who was sitting on a sofa. She liked him very much because he used to tell her stories and cut out all sorts of pretty things for her in paper, such as hearts with little ladies dancing in them, flowers, and palaces whose windows and doors would open. He was a gay and clever student. "Why do these flowers look so miserable?" she asked him again. "Don't you know?" replied the student. "Your flowers went to a ball last night, and now they are tired. That is why they hang their heads. They have danced too much." "Surely flowers cannot dance?" asked little Ida. "Of course they can dance," said the student. "When it is dark and little girls have gone to bed, they jump about merrily. They have a ball almost every night." "May children go to the ball too?" asked Ida. "Yes," said the student, "but only the children of the flowers, little daisies and lilies of the valley." "And where do the little pretty flowers dance?" asked little Ida. "Oh, not far from here," said the student. "Have you ever been to the large garden in front of the king's beautiful summer palace? The garden so full of flowers? Surely you remember the swans that come swimming up to you when you throw them crumbs of bread? Here they have the balls, I believe." "I was there yesterday with mother," said Ida, "but all the trees have already lost their leaves, and I did not see a single flower. What can have become of all of them? There are so many in the summer time." "They are in the palace," said the student. "As soon as the king leaves the summer residence and returns to town on his court, all the flowers rush out of the garden and into the palace, where they enjoy themselves tremendously." "Welcome in, Darth." "If only you could see them! The two loveliest roses sit on the throne and act king and queen. The red salcums arrange themselves in rows before, bowing very low. There are the gentlemen waiting. After that, the prettiest of the flowers come in and open the ball. The blue violets represent sailors and dance with the hyacinths and crocuses who take part as young ladies. The tulips and all the tall orange lilies are old dowagers whose business is to see that everything goes on in good order and with the best manners." Asked little Ida, astonished. "Are the flowers allowed to have their ball in the king's palace?" No one knows anything about it, said the student. Perhaps one during the night an old watchman may come in with a big bunch of keys to see everything is all right. But as soon as the flowers hear the clanking of the keys, they keep quite still and hide behind long silk curtains. I seem to smell flowers, said the watchman, shaking his head, but he is not able to see them. That's very funny, said Ida, clapping her little hands. But couldn't I see the flowers just once? Of course you can see them, replied the student. All you have to do is peep in the window next time you go to the palace. I did it only recently and saw a long yellow lily languidly lying on a sofa. That is a court lady. And the flowers in the botanical garden, can they go there too? Asked little Ida. Can they walk so far? All can go there if they want to, said the student. But they can fly if they wish to. Have you ever seen the enchanting red and yellow butterflies that look so much like flowers? These are flowers, too. Flying flowers, that jump from their stalks and move their petals as if they were little wings and fly about. Now, it is quite possible that the flowers of the botanical garden have not heard of what merrymaking goes on every night at the palace, but I'll tell you what to do. Next time you go to the garden next door, which belongs to the professor of botany, you whisper to one of the flowers that the ball is to be given the night at the king's palace. Then the news will be repeated from flower to flower, and they will all fly there. If the professor comes into the garden and finds all his flowers gone, he will not have any idea what has become of them. Indeed, said little Ida. How can the flowers repeat to each other what I say to them? I'm quite sure the flowers cannot speak. No, they cannot speak. You are right there, returned the student. But they will make themselves understood by pantomime. They have their own sign language. Have you ever seen them move to and fro through the breath of air? That is how they bow to each other and beckon with their leaves. They can understand one another this way as well as we can by talking. And does the professor understand the sign language? Asked little Ida. Oh, certainly, as you can imagine. One morning he came into the garden and noticed how a tall nettle was conversing with the pantomime with a pretty little carnation. You are beautiful, said the nettle to Carnation. I like you very much. But the professor would not allow this because such language would be out of order for a well-administered garden. So he gave the nettle a rap on his leaves, which are its fingers, and in doing so he stung himself badly, and since then he has never dared to touch a nettle again. That's what I call very funny, laughed Ida. In the meantime, an old morose town councillor had come on visits to see Ada's parents. How can you talk such nonsense to a child? He grumbled. He did not like the student at all, and thought he could occupy his time better than cutting out pasteboard figures. And he kept saying to the student, What do you mean by putting such nonsense into the child's head? It is old trash, fantastic rubbish. He did not like the student at all, and thought he could occupy his time better than by cutting out pasteboard figures. However, little Ida thought that what the student had told her about the little flowers was very nice, and she thought about it a lot. She was now sure that her flowers hung their heads because they were tired with dancing so much the night before. She took them to a corner in her room, where her playthings were, and where her doll lay sleeping in her little bed, and said to her, I'm sorry, Sophia, but you will have to give up the bed for tonight and sleep in the table drawer. The poor flowers are tired and have to have your bed. Then she took the doll out of her bed, but Sophia looked upset. She was very much annoyed to have given up her comfortable bed to the flowers. Ida then laid the faded flowers on her doll's bed and pulled the sheet over them and told them to lie quite still while they made some tea for them to drink, so that they might be well again in the morning and able to get up. And she drew the curtains round their bed so that the sun should not dazzle their eyes. All the evening she thought of nothing but the student's words, and just before she went to bed she ran up to the window where her mother's tulips and hyacinths stood behind the blinds and whispered to them, "I know very well that you are going to the ball tonight." But the flowers did not move a leaf and pretended not to have heard what she said. But Ida knew very well that what she knew. After she had got to bed, she thought for a long time how delightful it must be to see the flowers dancing in the palace, and thought to herself, "I wonder whether my flowers have been there." But before she could decide the point, she fell asleep. During the night she woke. She had been dreaming of the student and the flowers, and of the counselor who had been keeping on muttering, "Utter nonsense! Utter nonsense!" All was still in the room. The night lamp was burning on the table, and her father and mother were both fast asleep. "I wonder whether my flowers are still lying in Sophia's bed," she thought. "I should very much like to know." She raised herself a little, and looking towards the door, which now stood half open, she saw that her flowers and playthings were just as she had left them before going to bed. It is very quiet, yet as she listened, she seemed to hear as if someone was playing the piano in the next room, but the tones were lower and sweeter than she had ever heard before. "Now my flowers must certainly be dancing," she thought. "How I should like to see them." But she dared not get up for fear of waking her father and mother. "If they would only come in here." Still, the flowers did not come, and the music sounded so sweetly. So there was nothing else for her to do, if she wanted to see the flowers dancing, but to get out of bed. This she did noiselessly, stole towards the door of the next room, and peeped in. Oh, what wonderful things she saw then! There was no night lamp burning here. However, it was quite bright in the room, for the moon shone through the windows on the floor. All the hyacinths and tulips stood up in 2 rows, while their empty pots could be seen in the front of the windows. They performed figures and took hold of each other by their long green stems. At the piano sat a large yellow lily, which Ida fancied she must have seen before, for she remembered the student saying that this flower was exactly like Miss Laura, and how everyone had laughed at this remark. Now she herself agreed that the lily resembled her music teacher, for she had exactly her way of playing the piano, bowing her long yellow face now on one side, now on the other, and nodding her head to mark the time. All the flowers were so engrossed in their dancing and playing that none of them noticed little Ida. A tall blue crocus now stepped forward and sprang upon the table where Ida's playthings lay, went straight to Sophia's bed and drew back the curtains. There lay the tired flowers, and they rose immediately and greeted the other flower, who invited them to dance with them. The tired flowers appeared quite well again, and danced as merrily as the rest. An old nutcracker, whose lower lip had been broken off, bowed politely and welcomed the new arrivals. Suddenly a loud noise, as of something falling from the table, was heard. Ida cast a glance that way and saw that it was the rod which she had found on her bed in the morning of Tuesday, which seemed anxious to rank itself among the flowers. It was certainly a pretty rod for a wax doll to fix on top, wearing a hat as broad-brimmed as a counselor's, with a wide blue and red ribbon tied around it. It hopped upon 3 stilts in the midst of the flowers and stamped the floor merrily with its feet. It was dancing the mazurka, which the flowers could not dance because they were too light-footed and unable to stamp. All at once the wax doll on the rod swelled out a giant size and exclaimed in a loud voice, "What do you mean by putting such trash into a child's head? It is a fantastic nonsense!" Now the doll looked as much like the counselor as one drop of water resembles another, with a broad-brimmed hat, and its face was yellow and peevish as his. However, the rod pinched the doll's thin legs, whereupon it shrunk up again to its original size. Little Ida thought this scene so funny that she could not help but laugh. The rod continued to stamp about until the last doll counselor was obliged to dance too, whether it liked it or not. And it was to make itself now thin, now thick, now tall, now short, until the last of the flowers interceded for the rod, then left in peace. A loud knocking was heard from the drawer into which Ida had put her doll. It was Sophia who made the noise. The nutcracker ran to the edge of the table and lied down flat on his stomach and managed to pull the drawer open. Sophia pulled her head out of the drawer and asked with great astonishment, "Is there a ball going on in here? Why hasn't anybody told me?" "Will you dance with me?" asked the nutcracker. "You would be the right person for me to dance with," said Sophia, pertly, turning her back upon him. Then she sat down on the table, expecting that one of the flowers would come and ask her to dance. But nobody came. Meanwhile, the nutcracker danced by himself, and he did not do so badly. "Perhaps the flowers can't see me," said Sophia. And then she let herself fall down upon the floor, which excited a general commotion. All the flowers ran up to her and asked whether she had hurt herself, but she had received no injury. The flowers were all most polite, especially Ida's flowers, who took the opportunity to thank her for the comfortable bed in which they had slept so quietly. And then they seized her hands and danced with her in the middle of the floor, where the moon shone so brightly, while all the other flowers stood in a circle around them and watched the dancing. Sophia was quite happy now, and asked Ida's flowers to make good use of her bed again, and she did not at all mind sleeping one night in the table drawer. But the flowers said, "We owe you many thanks for your kindness, but we shall live long enough to need it, for tomorrow we shall be quite dead. But ask the little girl to bury us in the garden near the spot where she buried her canary. Then we shall grow again next summer, and be even more beautiful than we had been this year." "Oh, you must not die," replied Sophia, warmly as she kissed the flowers. Just at that moment the folding door to the hall was suddenly opened, and a great many beautiful flowers came dancing into the room. Ida could not imagine where these flowers had come from, unless it was from the king's garden. The procession was headed by two beautiful roses wearing golden crowns as if they were king and queen. They were followed by stalks and pinks bowing in the company on all sides. They also had music bands. Big poppies and peonies were blowing on pea shells until they were quite red in the face, while blue and white campanias rang a merry peal of bells. These were followed by the immense number of different flowers, all dancing. Violets, daisies, lilies of the valley, narcissi, and others who all moved so gracefully that it delighted to see them. They all kissed each other very tenderly. At last even these flowers got tired, and they wished one another good night. Little Ida once more crept back into her bed to dream of all the beautiful things she had seen that enchanting night. The next morning, as soon as she was up and dressed, she went into her little corner to see her flowers were still there. She drew the curtains aside from the doll's bed, and yes, there lay the flowers. But today they were much more faded than yesterday. Sophia, too, was in her drawer, but she looked uncommonly sleepy. "Can you remember what you were to say to me?" said little Ida. But Sophia made a most stupid face and did not answer. "You are very naughty," said Ida, "yet the flowers let you dance with them." Then she chose from her playthings a little pasteboard box with birds painted on it, and in it she placed the faded flowers. "That shall be your coffin," she said. In the afternoon, her two cousins came to see her, and with them she arranged a solemn funeral in the garden. The two boys had been given new darts and arrows by their father, and they brought them along to show to Ida. The two boys walked in front with their bows slung over their shoulders, and little Ida followed, carrying the dead flowers in their pretty coffin. The grave was dug for them in the garden. Ida kissed the flowers once more, then laid the box down in the hollow, saying, "Now sleep in peace, and come up again next summer twice as beautiful as you are this year." And the two boys shot their arrows over the grave by way of a salute, and little darts shot up through the leafless branches of the trees into the blue autumn sky. They're about to hit ads. Oh, yes, catch the moth. Okay, well, go ahead and hit the ads so we can get this out of the way. See you in a few. There's something about old books that always makes me wonder. It can be a decades old book, but you don't know how many people have actually read it until you find flaws with it. Let's see. So if this one was last printed 1972, and flipping through the pages, I come across one that looks like it's dog-eared. You kind of expect that in some old books. I prefer not to find it in old books, but it's not dog-eared as regular dog-earing would be. It's got folded during the cutting phase, so it actually has excess paper in it. And it's so strange when you find a print error like this. It just makes the book stand out more in collections. And for a book older than me, it's nice to find some things that are so flawed. And I know I'm not the first owner of the book. So several people have known about this, and no one has tried to correct it. That just makes it even more valuable in a book collector's opinion. Anyway, we've got a sad story now. A real sad story. That again is usually linked to Christmas because that's when people get sad, apparently. I have read it on my Christmas special. So, yeah. This will be the second or third recording I have of it. If you couldn't tell by the weird introduction I gave it, our next story is a little match girl. The little match girl. It was dreadfully cold. It was snowing fast and getting dark. The last evening of the old year was dawning in, but cold and dark as it was, the poor little girl with the bare head and feet was still wandering about the streets. When she had left home, she had been wearing slippers, but they had been much too large for her feet. Indeed, they really belonged to her mother, and they had dropped off her feet while she had been running very fast across the road to get out of the way of two carriages. One of the slippers was completely lost. The other had been snatched up by a boy who ran off with it, thinking it might come in handy one day. So the little girl walked on, her bare feet quite red and blue with the cold. She carried a small bundle of matches in her hand, and a good many more in her tattered apron. No one had bought any of them the whole long day. No one had given her a single penny. Trembling with cold and hunger, she crept on, looking forlorn and sorrowful. Poor little child. The snowflakes fell on her long fair hair, which curled with pretty ringlets over her shoulders. but she was not aware of her own beauty. The lights were glimmering through every window, and the smell of roast goose reached her from several houses. It was New Year's Eve, and it was of this that she thought. In a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she cowered down, drawing her little feet close under her. But it did not help. She could not get warm, and she dared not go home. She had not sold a single box of matches. She earned not a single penny. Perhaps her father would beat her. Besides, her home was almost as cold as the street. It was an attic, and the wind and snow penetrated through the many chinks in the roof, although they were stopped up with straw and rags. Her little hands were numb with cold. One little match from her bundle would warm them, perhaps, if she dared to light it. She drew one out and struck it against the wall. It sputtered and burned. It was a light. It was a bright, warm flame, and she held her hands over it. It was quite an illumination for that poor little girl, I said rather a magic taper, for it seemed to her as though she were sitting in front of a large iron stove with brass ornaments, so beautifully it blazed the fire within. It was like a miracle. The child stretched out her feet to warm them too, but alas, in an instant the flame had died away. The stove vanished. The little girl sat cold and comfortless, with the burnt match in her hands. It was dreadfully cold. A second match was struck against the wall. It kindled, blazed, and wherever its light fell, the wall became transparent as if it were a veil. The little girl could look into the room within. She saw the table spread with a snow-white damask cloth, whereupon sat sparkling china dishes. The roast goose stuffed with apples and plums stood on one end, piping hot, and, which was pleasant of all to see, the goose, with a knife and fork still in her breast, jumped down from the table and waddled along the floor right up to the poor child. But suddenly the match was burnt out, and only the thick, hard wall was beside her. It was dreadfully cold. The girl kindled a third match. Again the flame shot up, and now she was sitting under the most beautiful Christmas tree, far larger and far more prettily decked out than the one she had seen last Christmas Eve through the glass door of the rich merchant's house. Hundreds of candles lighted up the green branches, and tiny painted figures, such as she had seen in the shop windows, looked down upon her from the tree. The child stretched out her hands towards him in delight, and at that moment the light for the match was quenched. But the Christmas candles burned brighter and brighter. They looked to her like stars in heaven, and now one of them fell, the light streaming behind it, with a long fiery tail. "Someone is dying now," said the little girl softly, for she had once been told by her old grandmother, the only person who had ever been kind to her and who was now dead, that whenever a star falls, an immortal spirit returns to God who had created it. It was dreadfully cold. The little girl struck yet another match against the wall, and it flared up, and surrounded by its light, the same dear old grandmother appeared before her, gentle and loving as always, but bright and happy as she had never looked during her lifetime. "Grandmother!" exclaimed the child. "Oh, take me with you! I know you will soon vanish as soon as the match is out. You'll disappear like the fire stove, and the splendid roast goose, like the beautiful Christmas tree." She hastily lighted all the remaining matches in the bundle, lest her grandmother should disappear, and the matches burned with such a blaze of splendor that noonday could scarcely have been brighter. Never had the good old grandmother looked so tall and stately, so beautiful and kind. She took the little girl into her arms, and they both flew together. Joyfully and gloriously they flew higher and higher, till they were in that place where neither cold nor hunger nor pain is ever known. They were in paradise. In the cold morning hour, crouching in the corner by the wall, the poor little girl was found, her cheeks glowing, her lips smiling, frozen to death on the last night of the old year. The New Year's sun shone on the lifeless child, who was sitting there motionless, with the matches in her lap, one bundle of them completely burnt out. She has been trying to warm herself, poor thing, people said, but no one knew of the sweet visions she had beheld. Hmm. See, not technically a Christmas story, it's a New Year's Eve story. Still. The next story is Fabulous Regimented Fairy Tales. Though there's a female hypno in chat if anyone wants to catch it. The Wild Swans. Far from here, in a country where the swallows fly in our winter time, there dwelt a king. He had 11 sons and one daughter, called Elise. The 11 brothers, they were real princes, went to school with stars on their breasts and swords at their sides, and they wrote on golden tablets with diamond pens and were so clever that they knew everything by heart. In short, it was easy to see that they were princes. The little sister Elise used to sit on a little glass stool and read a picture book, which had cost half the kingdom. Yes, the children had a good time, but they were not to remain happy. Their mother was dead, and now their father, the king of all the country, married a very wicked woman who was not at all kind to the poor children. They found this out on the first day after the marriage, when they had a grand gala at the palace. The children played at having company, but instead of having as many cakes and sweetmeats as usual, the wicked queen gave them only some sand in a dish and told them to imagine it was something nice. The following week, the wicked queen sent little Elise to be brought up by some peasants in the country, and it was not long before she had told the king so many falsehoods about the poor princes that they were no longer fond of them. Go out in the world and look for yourselves, said the wicked queen. Fly away in the shape of large, speechless birds. But she could not make their transformation as disagreeable as she wished. The princes were changed into 11 white swans. Sending forth a strange cry, they flew out of the palace windows, over the park, and over the wood. It was still early in the morning when they passed by the farmhouse where Elise lay sleeping. Several times they flew around the roof and stretched their long necks and flapped their wings, but no one heard or saw them. They were forced to fly away, up into the clouds and into the wide world. So on they went to the large dark forest, which extended as far as the seashore. Poor little Elise stood in the peasant's cottage amusing herself with a green leaf, for she had no other plaything. She pricked a hole into the leaf and peeped through it at the sun. Then she fancied she saw her brother's clear, bright eyes looking down at her, and whenever the warm rays of the sun shone upon her cheeks, she thought of her brother's loving kisses. One day passed exactly like the other, and when the wind blew through the thick hedges of rose trees in front of the house, she would whisper to the roses, "Who is more beautiful than you?" But the roses would shake their heads and say, "Alice." And when on Sundays the peasant's wife sat at the door of the cottage reading her hymn book, the wind would rustle the leaves and say to the book, "Who is more pious than you?" "Alice." The hymn book would reply, and what the roses in the hymn book said was no more than the truth. When Elise was 15 years old, she was sent to be home. But when the queen saw how beautiful she was, she began to hate the poor girl with all her heart. and she would have liked to transform her into a wild swan like her brothers. She dared not do so, however, because the king was anxious to see his daughter. So the next morning the queen went to the bath, made entirely of marble, and fitted it up with soft pillows and gay carpets. She took 3 toads and kissed them and said to one, "You will sit down on Elisa's head when she enters this bathroom, and that she may be as dull and sleepy as you are. You settle upon her forehead," she said to the second toad, "and let her become ugly like you, so that her father may not know her again, and you place yourself upon her bosom." She said to the third, "That her heart may become evil with a torment to herself." Then she put the toads into the clear water, which was immediately tinted with a green color. Then she called Elise, undressed her, and made her get into the water. One toad settled on her hair, one on her forehead, and the third on her bosom, but Elise did not seem at all aware of it. She rose up, and 3 poppies were seen swimming on the water. Had the toads not been poisonous and kissed by a witch, they would have changed into roses when resting on Elise's head and heart, for she was too good for magic to have power over her. When the queen saw this, she rubbed walnut juice all over the maiden's skin, so that she became quite swarthy, smeared with nasty smelling salve over her lovely face, and entangled her long, thick hair. After this, it was impossible to recognize beautiful little Elise. For those who don't know, walnut juice was kind of an ink. When her father saw her, he was shocked and said she could not be his daughter. No one wanted anything to have to do with her apart from the old dog and the swallows, but they, poor dumb animals, could not say anything in her favor. Poor Elise wept and thought of her 11 brothers, not one of whom she saw in the palace. Sadly, she stole away and wandered the whole day over fields and moors till she reached the forest. She did not know where to go, but she was very distressed and longed so much to see her brothers. She was certain that they, too, had been driven out into the world. She determined to seek and to find them. She had not been in the forest long when night fell, and she lost her way in the darkness. She lay down on the soft moss and said her evening prayer, and leaned her head against the trunk of a tree. It was very still in the forest. The air was mild, and around her gleamed the tiny light of many hundred glowworms, and when least likely touched one of the branches hanging over her, bright insects fell down upon her like falling stars. All night she dreamed of her brothers. They were all children again. They played together. They wrote on their diamond pens and golden tablets, and looked at the pictures in the beautiful book which cost half a kingdom. But they did not, as before, make only straight strokes and dots on the tablet. No, they wrote in bold actions, like they had performed in strange adventures they had encountered. And in the picture book, everything seemed alive. The birds sang, the men and women stepped from the book and talked to Elise and her brothers. However, when she turned over the leaves, they jumped back into their places, so that the pictures did not get mixed up. When Elise woke, the sun was already high in the sky, and she could not really see it, for the tall trees of the forest closely entwined their thickly leaved branches, which, as the sunbeams played upon them, looked like a golden veil waving to and fro. The air was fragrant, and the birds perched upon Elise's shoulders. There were several springs forming a pool with the prettiest pebbles on the bottom. Brushes were growing thickly around it, and the deer had trodden a broad path around them, and by this Elise went down to the water's edge. The water was so clear that, had not the bushes and boughs been moved to and fro by the wind, she might have fancied that they were painted upon a smooth surface. So distinctly was each little leaf mirrored upon it, whether glowing in the sunlight or lying in the shade. As soon as Elise saw her face reflected in the water, she was quite startled, so brown and ugly did it look. However, when she had wetted her little hand and rubbed her brows and eyes, the white skin again appeared. She took off her clothes and stepped into the fresh water, and in the whole world there's not a king's daughter more beautiful than she'd seen. After she had dressed again and had braided her long hair, she went to the bubbling spring and drank out of the hollow of her hand, and then wandered farther into the forest. She did not know where she was going, but she thought of her brothers and of the good God who, she felt, would not forsake her. He it was who led her to the tree whose boughs bent under the weight of their fruit. She made her meal under its shade and propped up its boughs, then walked on amid the dark twilight of the forest. It was so still that she could hear her own footsteps and the rustling of each withered leaf that crushed beneath her feet. Not a bird was to be seen, not a sunburn penetrated the thick foliage. The tall trunks of the trees stood so close together that they seemed to form a trellis work. There was solitude here, such as Elise had never known before. The night was very dark, and not a single glowworm sent forth its light. Sadly, she lay down to sleep, and then it seemed to her as though the boughs above her head opened, and she saw an angel looking down upon her with gentle eyes, and 1,000 little cherubs around him. When she woke in the morning, she could not tell whether this had been a dream, or whether she had really been so watched over. She walked on a little further and met an old woman with a basket full of berries. The old woman gave her some of them, and Elise asked her if she had seen 11 princes ride through the wood. No, said the old woman, but yesterday I saw 11 swans with golden crowns on their heads swim down the river that flows quite near this place. And she led Elise to a little farmer on the precipice, and the base of which was washed by a brook. The trees on each side stretched their long leafy branches towards each other, and where they could not unite, the roots had disengaged themselves from the earth and hung their interlaced fibers over the water. Elise bade the old woman farewell and opened and wandered by the side of the stream until she came to a place where it reached the open sea. The great, beautiful sea lay extended before the maiden's eyes, but not a ship, not a boat was to be seen. How was she to go on? She noticed numerous little stones on the shore, which the waves had shaped in a round form. Glass, iron, stone, everything laid scattered there had been molded into shape. And yet the water which had done all this was much softer than Elise's delicate little hand. It rolls on untiringly, she said, and subdues what is so hard. I shall work so no less untiringly. Thank you for the lesson you've given me, you bright rolling waves. Some day my heart tells me you will carry me to my dear brothers. On the wet seaweed there lay 11 white swan feathers. Elise collected them in a bunch, and drops of water hung about them. Whether they were dew or tears, she could not tell. She was quite alone on the seashore, but she did not care, for the sea presented an eternal variety. When a black cloud passed across the sky, it was as if the sea were saying, I, too, can look dark. And then the wind would blow the waves and fling out their white foam. When the clouds would shone like a bright red tint and the winds were asleep, the sea, too, looked like a rose leaf. It was now green, now white, but however peacefully it responded, there was always a light breeze on the shore, causing the water to heave gently on the bosom of a sleeping child. At sunset, we saw 11 wild swans with golden crowns on their heads fly towards the land. They flew one behind another, looking like a streaming white ribbon. Elise climbed down the precipice and concealed herself behind a bush. The swans settled close to her and flapped their long white wings. As the sun sank behind the water, the swans vanished, and in their place stood 11 handsome princesses, Elise's brothers. She uttered a loud cry, for although they have changed much, Elise felt that they must be her brothers. She ran into their arms and called them by their names, and how happy they were to see and recognize their sister, now grown so tall and beautiful. They laughed and wept and soon realized how wickedly their stepmother had treated them. We, said the eldest of the brothers, fly or swim as long as the sun is above the horizon, but when it sinks, we can appear again in human form. We must therefore see to it that at sunset we have a safe resting place, for if we are seen flying among the clouds, we should fall down as we resumed our own form. We do not live here. The land is quite beautiful as this lies on the opposite side of the sea, but it is far off. To reach it, we have to cross the deep waters, and there is no island midway on which we may rest the night. One little rock rises from the waves, just large enough for us to stand on it side by side, and when the sea is rough and we are sprinkled with its foam. But we are thankful for the resting place. Without it, we would never be able to visit our dear native country. Once a year, this is the only visit to our father's home is permitted. We require two of the longest days of flight, and can remain only 11 days, during which time we fly over the large forest whence we can see the palace in which we were born, and where our father dwells. Yeah, it would take a long time to call it 11 names. In the tower of the church in which our mother is buried. Here, even the trees and bushes seem akin to us. Here the wild horses still race over the plains in the days of our childhood. Here the charcoal burner sings the same old tunes to which we used to dance in our youth. Here is our home, and here we have found you again, dear little sister. We have still 2 days longer to stay here. Then we must fly across the sea to the land, beautiful indeed, but not our motherland. But how shall we take you with us? We have neither ship nor raft. How shall I be able to release you? Said the sister. So they went on talking the whole night, discussing the problem. They slumbered only a few hours. Elise was awakened by the rustling of swan's wings, which were fluttering above her. Her brothers were once again transformed. For some time they flew around her in large circles, and at last they flew far, far away. But one of them had remained behind. He was the youngest. He laid his head on her lap, and she stroked his white wings. The whole day they remained together. Toward evening the others came back, and when the sun set they again stood on firm ground in their natural form. Tomorrow we shall fly away again, they said, and we dare not return for a whole year. But we cannot leave you here alone. Have you the courage to accompany us? Our arm is strong enough to carry you through the forest. We shall not be our combined wings suffice strength to carry you across the sea. Oh, yes, please, take me with you, said Elise. They spent the whole night weaving a mat of the pollen willow bark and the rough rushes, and their mat was thick and strong. Elise lay down on it, and when the sun had risen, the brothers were again transformed into wild swans. They seized the mat with their beaks and flew up high among the clouds with their dear sister, who was still asleep. The sunbeams shone full upon her face, so one of the swans who flew over shaded her with his broad wings. They were already far from land when Elise woke. She thought she was still dreaming, so strange that it appeared to her to be traveling through the air and over the sea. By her lay a cluster of pretty berries that sang full of savory roots. Her youngest brother had collected them and laid them for her there, and then she thanked him with a smile, for she knew him as the swan who flew overhead and shaded her with his wings. They flew so high that the ship they saw beneath them seemed like a white seagull skimming over the water. Elise saw behind her a large cloud. It looked like a mountain, and on it she saw a gigantic shadow of herself and the 11 swans. It formed a picture more splendid than any she had ever seen before. Soon, however, the sun rose higher, and the cloud remained far behind, and then the floating, shadowy picture disappeared. The whole day they continued flying with a whirring noise, somewhat like an arrow, but they traveled more slowly than usual. They had to carry their sister. The heavy tempest was gathering. The evening approached. Anxiously, Elise watched the sun. It was setting. Still, a solitary rock could not be seen. It appeared to her that the swans plied their wings with increasing vigor. Alas, it would be her fault if her brothers did not arrive at the place in time. They would become human beings when the sun set, and if this happened before they reached the rock, they would fall into the sea and be drowned. She prayed to God most fervently, and still no rock was to be seen. The black clouds drew nearer. Violent gusts of wind announced the approach of a tempest. The clouds had become fearfully large, dark mass. One flash of lightning rapidly succeeded another. The sun was now on the rim of the sea. Elise's heart trembled violently. The swans shot downward so swiftly that she thought she would fall, but they began to hover. Already the sun had half sunk beneath the water, and at that moment she saw the little rock below her. It looked like a seal's head when he raised it just above the water, and the sun was sinking fast. It seemed scarcely larger than a star. Just then her foot touched the hard ground, and the sun vanished altogether like a last spark of a burnt piece of paper. Linking their arms, her brothers stood around her, and true enough, there was only room for her and them. The sea beat impetuously upon the rock, flinging over a shower of foam. The sky seemed to continual blaze with fast succeeding flashes of fire that lightened it, and the thunder rolled on, peal after peal. But sister and brothers kept firm hold of each other's hands. They sang a song, and that gave them comfort and courage. By daybreak, the air was clear and still, and as soon as the sun came up, the fawns flew away with release from the rock. The waves rose higher and higher, and when travelers looked down from the clouds upon the blackish green sea, covered with white foam, they could have imagined that millions of swans were swimming on its surface. The day advanced, and we saw, as if floating on air, a land of mountains intermixed with glaciers, and in the center, a palace a mile in length with splendid colonnades rising above one another, palm trees and gorgeous-looking flowers as large as mill wheels growing beneath. Elise asked if this was the country which they were flying, but the swan shook her head, for what she saw was the beautiful airy castle of the fairy Morgana, where no human being was ever admitted. While Elise still feasted her eyes upon it, mountains, seas, and castle all disappeared, and in their place stood 12 proud churches with high towers and pointed windows. She thought she could hear the organ play, and it was only the murmur of the sea. She was now so close to these churches, but behold, it had suddenly changed into a large fleet of ships sailing under them. She looked down and saw that it was only the sea mists passing rapidly over the water. An eternal variety floated before her eyes until at last an actual land, whither they were bound, appeared in sight. The beautiful blue mountains, cedar woods, towns, and castles rose to view. Long before sunset, Lise was set down on a rock in front of a large cavern. Delicate young creepers grew along it so thickly that it appeared to be covered with gaily embroidered carpets. Now, now we shall see what you dream of tonight, said her youngest brother, as he showed her the sleeping chamber destined for her. Oh, that I could dream how you will be released from this spell, she said, and this thought completely occupied her. She prayed most earnestly for God's assistance, and even in her dreams she continued praying. Then it seemed to her that she was flying up high in the air towards the castle of the fairy Morgana. The fairy came forward to meet her. She looked radiant and beautiful, and yet Elise thought she resembled an old woman who had given her the berries in the forest, and had told her the swans with golden crowns. You can release your brothers, said she, but you will suffer. But will you have sufficient courage and patience? The water is indeed softer than your delicate hands, and yet it can mold the hard stones to its will. But then it cannot feel the pain which your tender fingers will feel. It has no heart, it cannot suffer the anxiety and grief which you suffer. Look at these stinging nettles in my hand. There are many of the same kind growing around the cave where you were sleeping. Only these that grow here and on the graves of the churchyard will be of use. Remember that. You must pick them, although they will sting your hands, but you have to break them with your feet to get the yarn from them. With this yarn you must weave 11 shirts with long sleeves. Throw them over the 11 swans, and the spell will be broken. But mark this. From the moment that you begin your work until it is completed, even should it take you years, you must not speak one word. The first syllable that escapes your lips will pierce your brother's heart like a dagger. On your tongue depends their life. As she touched Elisa's hand with a nettle which made it burn like fire, so that Elisa woke. It was broad daylight, and close to her lay a nettle like the one she had seen in her dreams. She fell upon her knees and thanked God, and went out of the cave to begin her work. With her delicate hands she picked the ugly, stinging nettles. They made large blisters on her hands and arms, but she bore the pain willingly in the hope of releasing her dear brothers. She broke the nettles with her naked feet and spun the green yarn. At sunset, her brothers came home. Lisa's silence frightened them. They thought it must be the effect of some spell her wicked stepmother had cast on them. But when they saw her blistered hands, they realized what their sister had set out to do for them. The youngest brother wept, and as soon as his tears fell upon her hands, Elise felt no more pain, and the blisters disappeared. The whole night she spent in her work, for she could not rest until she had released her dear brothers. All the following day she sat in solitude, for the swans had flown away, but never had time passed so quickly for her. It was not long before the first shirt was completed, and now she began the second. One day, quite suddenly, a hunting horn was sounded in the mountains, and that frightened Elise. The noise came near, and she heard the hounds baying. In great terror she fled into the cave, and tied the green yarn which she had spun into a bundle, and sat down upon it. At the same moment, large hounds sprang out from the bushes. Two others immediately followed. They bayed loudly and ran away, and then returned. It was not long before the huntsman stood in front of the cave. The handsomest among them was the king of that country. He walked up to Elise. Never before had he seen a maiden as lovely as she. "How did you get here, beautiful child?" he asked. Elise shook her head. She was not allowed to speak, for she had spoke to Elise's brothers. But she did hide her hands under her apron so that the king should not see how she was suffering. "Come with me," he said. "You should not stay here. If you are as good as you are beautiful, I shall clothe you in velvet and silk. I shall place a crown upon your head, and you shall live in my palace." Because kings like meeting random speechless girls. He lifted her on his horse, and she wept and wrung her hands. But the king said, "I only desire your happiness. Some day you will appreciate it." And away he rode over the mountains and valleys, holding her on his horse in front, while the other huntsmen followed. At sunset, the king's magnificent capital with its churches and cupolas lay before them, and the king led Elise into his palace, where the fountains were playing between marble pillars, and where beautiful pictures adorned the walls. But Elise did not care for all the splendor. She wept and mourned in silence, while the attendants dressed her in royal robes, wove costly pearls into her hair, and pulled soft gloves over her blistered hands. As she now stood in the splendid attire, her beauty was so dazzling that the courtiers all bowed low before her. The king chose her for his bride, although his prime minister shook his head and whispered that the beautiful lady of the wood was surely a witch who had blinded their eyes and infatuated the king's heart. But the king did not listen. He ordered the music to be played and a sumptuous banquet to be served. The lovely maidens danced around the bride, and she was led through the fragrant gardens and to magnificent halls. But no smile played upon her lips, and no beam shone from her eyes. The king then showed her into a small room next to her sleeping apartment. It was adorned with costly green tapestry and resembled a cave in which she had found. On the ground lay the bundle of yarn which she had spun from the nettles, and on the wall hung the shirt she had completed. One of the huntsmen had brought all this along, thinking it must mean something wonderful to her. "Here you may dream of your former house," said the king, "and here is the work you did there. Amidst all this pleasant splendor, and it sometimes amuse you to remember that time." When Liz saw that this was so dear to her heart, she smiled and color returned to her cheeks. She thought her brothers might still be released, and she kissed the king's hand in gratitude. He, however, pressed her to his heart and covered the bells of the churches to be rung to announce the celebration of their wedding. The beautiful, silent maiden from the woods was to become queen of the land. Because kings, yes. The prime minister whispered evil words into the king's ears, but they made no impression on him. The marriage was solemnized, and the prime minister himself had to place a crown upon Elisa's head. In his rage, he pressed the sharp-edged rim so firmly on her forehead that it hurt her. But she remained silent. A single word from her would have killed her brothers. Her eyes, however, showed her heartfelt love for the king, who was good and handsome, and who had done so much to make her happy. How she longed to be able to confide in all her sorrows to him. but silent she had to remain until her work was completed. To this end, she stole away every night and went into the little room that was fitted up like her cave. There she worked at her shirts, but by the time she had begun the seventh, her yarn had run out. She knew that the nettles she needed grew in the churchyard, but she had to gather them herself. How was she to get them? "What is the pain in the fingers compared to the anguish my heart suffers?" she said to herself. "I must venture to the churchyard. The good God will not withdraw his protection from me." Fearful, as though she were about to do wrong, one moonlit night she crept down to the garden, through the long avenues, and reached the lonely road that led to the churchyard. She saw a number of ugly old witches sitting one by the broadest tombstones. Elise was obliged to pass close by, and the witches fixed their wicked eyes upon her. But she said a quick prayer and gathered the nettles and looked back at them to her place. But she said a quick prayer, gathered the stinging nettles, and took them back into her palace. I guess she didn't say that. There was only one person who had seen her. It was the Prime Minister. He was awake when others slept. Now he was convinced there was something wrong with the young queen. He had been right after all. She must be a witch who had, through her enchantments, infatuated the king and all the people. When they were alone, he told the king what he had seen and what he feared. When the slanderous words came from his lips, the sculpture's images of the king's forebears shook their heads as though they were saying, "It is untrue, Elise's innocence." But the minister explained this miracle in a different way. He said they were shaking their heads about Elise's sinfulness. On hearing this, two large tears rolled down the king's cheeks. Doubt had entered his heart. He pretended to sleep at night, though sleep would never visit him. He noticed that Elise rose from her bed every night, and every time he followed her secretly and saw her enter her little room. His countenance became darker every day. Elise noticed it, but did not know the cause. It grieved her, and besides, what she did not suffer in her own heart for her brothers. Her bitter tears ran down on the royal velvet and purple. They looked like bright diamonds. She had now nearly finished her work. Only one shirt was wanting. Unfortunately, she had not a single nettle left. Once more, only once, she would have to go to the somber churchyard and gather a few handfuls. She shuddered when she thought of the solitary walk and the horrid witches. She went, but the king and the minister followed her. They saw her disappear through the churchyard door, and when they came near, they saw the witches sitting on a tombstone. The king turned away, believing that she was one of them. "Let us not judge her," he said, and the people condemned her to be burnt at the stake. "Let the people judge her," he said, and the people condemned her to be burnt to the stake. You're welcome. Now she was dragged from the king's sumptuous apartments into a damp, dark hole of a prison where the wind whistled through the barred windows. Instead of velvet and silk, they gave her a bundle of nettles she had gathered on which to lay her head. The shirts she had woven were to serve as her mattress and counterpane, but they could not have given her anything she valued more. She continued to work, at the same time praying earnestly. Outside, the street urchins sang scandalous songs about her. Not a soul comforted her with one word of love. Towards the evening she heard the rustling of swans' wings against the bars. It was the youngest of her brothers who had at last found a sister, and she sobbed with joy, although she knew that the coming night would probably be the last of her life. But then her work was almost finished, and her brothers were near. Little mice were scurrying across the floor, busily dragging the nettles to her feet, wishing to help her, and a thrush perched on the iron bars and sang all night to give her courage. It was still twilight, just before the hour of sunrise. But then the 11 brothers stood before the palace gates and requested an audience with the king. But it could not be, they were told. The king was asleep, and nobody dared to wake him. They entreated, they threatened. The guard came up, and the king himself at last stepped out to ask what was the matter. At that moment, the sun rose, and the brothers could be seen no longer. Instead, 11 swans flew away over the palace. The people poured forth from the gates of the city, all eager to see the witch burn. One wretched horse pulled the cart on which Elise had been placed. A coarse frock of sackcloth had been put on her. Her long, beautiful hair hung loosely over her shoulders. Her cheeks were a deadly pallor. Her lips moved gently, and her fingers wove the green yarn. 10 shirts were lying in front of her. She was working on the 11th. "Look at this witch! See how she's muttering!" said Mott. "It is not a hymn book that is in her hand. No, there she sits with her accursed witchery. Tear it from her! Tear it to 1,000 pieces!" And they all crowded about her, and were on the point of snatching away the shirts, when 11 white swans came flying towards the cart. They settled around her and flapped their wings. The crowd gave way in terror. "It is a sign from heaven. She must be innocent," whispered some, but they dared not say it aloud. The sheriff now seized her by the hand. In a moment she threw the 11 shirts over the swans. 11 handsome princes appeared in their place. The youngest had, however, only one arm and a wing instead of the other, for one sleeve was lacking in a shirt. She was not able to finish it. "Now I may speak," she said. "I'm innocent." "Yes, she's innocent," said her oldest brother, and he related their wonderful story. And while he spoke, a fragrance as if from 1,000 roses pervaded the air, for every piece of wood in the funeral pyre had taken root and had sent forth branches, and a hedge of blooming roses surrounded Elise. Above all the other blossoms, a flower of dazzling white. King plucked it and laid it on Elise's bosom, and that action gave her peace and joy of heart. And all the church began to ring their second note, and the birds flew to the spot in swarms. There was a festive procession back to the palace, such as no king has ever seen equaled, and the queen's 11 handsome brothers were the guests of honor. It makes me wonder if she could finish the shirt and give it back to him. I don't know. Well, the curse was generally broken. I guess she could just finish the shirt, but of course I keep thinking it's funny that she was praying to God the entire time, but it was Morgana that helped her. I don't know. They really should finish that story somehow, but they want to end it there. And I always try to figure out what kingdom people from Heimchrist and Andersen stories go to. Because it's clearly part of a swan migration and a swallow migration, because it was a swallow that carried Thumbelina to her new land. And then the Little Mermaid It's tropical because he literally says there's palm trees lining the stairway up to the palace. So it does make me wonder which kingdoms he's talking about. So the next door is another long one, I believe. Let's see, Wild Swans. It's 21 pages. Fir Tree is just 10, but I'm not sure if I'd be able to manage that one tonight. I'm already starting to have a few vocal problems. But I'm glad you like the stories. If you want to hear more of them, there's my entire YouTube channel actually. As if you see this is listed as Friday Night Fairy Tales Series 23. That means this is the 23rd fairy tale book I've read. And everything's on my YouTube channel because that's where I keep my archive. So it's full of old stories, or you can listen to the ones here on Twitch. As I've got, I think, 9 that I can store here because I go ahead and edit the videos from the streams offline, then load the stories by themselves without my commentary. But yeah, I've got, let's see, I'm gonna look at the video count on my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel currently has 1,707 videos. And that's both the streams and the edited sections of the streams together. So like I have the full narration of Frankenstein, I have the full narration of Dracula, I have the full narration of The Mummy, and I've got the holiday series that I've done and everything else. So it's got a lot of videos. It is preferred that you read public domain ones just because of possible copyright issues. Like the book I'm reading from technically wouldn't be without outside of copyright, but the stories in it are. And just like the one I'm reading for American Folk Tales, it's printed in the 40s, but the stories go back in the 1800s. And there are some authors that you can actually talk to and get permission to read their stories because they kind of like people reading their stories. And a lot of times you can get the public domain stories on Project Gutenberg. I'm a little bit more fickle than that, and I have physical copies of everything. So I have century-old books. Switch back to the screen. Yeah, I think the oldest book that I've narrated on here, I think it was just doing a couple of poems out of it. Project Gutenberg is a lot of stories. Because it's pretty much people were typing out all the stories and publishing them online for public use. So I think there's 4 or 5 different copies of Andersen's fairy tales on there. There's 8 translated versions of the Brothers Grimm stories. They've got a lot of there. Again, I'm the crazy one who actually likes to have physical copies of everything. But then again, I'm also someone who likes to make my own books. But it's all here. Maybe available at post link. Just post a link. But it's Gutenberg.org. That is the link to the Gutenberg project, or Project Gutenberg, that has all of these books. I have more books than I have bookshelves right now. I need at least 3 or 4 more at the moment. But I go to estate sales and I find old books that people are selling, and I pretty much buy them. Well, lately I've actually been... Yeah, estate sales, great places to find old books. I also... I'm friends with a couple of used bookstore owners now. And one of my sponsorship things that I'm doing is I also have a shop on bookshop.org that you can order books through. I used to have one for thrift books, but I didn't get much traffic. But estate sales, garage sales, used bookstores, all great places to find books. Estate sales are going to be definitely more used. I've got some books that are falling apart and I'm having to rebind them myself. So, as I said, I get a lot of old books. I do have my books on Kindle. They are me rewriting the books. So you know how I do the stories I tell on stream? I have the books done for people to narrate them. So I'll have have the actual story, and I'll have information about what's going on in the story. Like Little Red Riding Hood, it mentions that she was picking a nosegay for her grandmother. A nosegay is a small bouquet that people used to use instead of perfume. But I'll define things, I add commentary to them. I think on the 3rd book I actually started jokingly doing a kill count from a death warrant book. Yeah, I said, if it's information I have to look up, I will put it in my books, because if I'm curious about it, someone else will be curious about it. Just like, I'd heard the term garret before, didn't know what it was. Pretty much, it's an attic bedroom, or an attic room. They do tend to have some snarky comments about some characters. Like, it's like I made the comment about kings marrying speechless maidens in the forest. That happens in so many stories, I have to make a joke out of it every time I see it. And like on one of the things I'm trying to research right now, I'm trying to get my hands on a book of the fairy tale motifs. Now she's beautiful, doesn't speak, absolutely perfect. Several times there'll be a naked one, just naked in the woods with what their hair is covering they can do living in a tree. So, like the story of Little Wild Rose. She's just an abandoned baby found in the woods. She was first found by a fisherman who he and his wife had wanted a kid for so long. He ended up finding her in the woods, put her in a bucket, brought her home, left her outside the door to go get his wife to come out and see her. But while he was inside, an eagle flew by, took the bucket and baby up to its nest. So the child was not born, well, not raised by humans. It was raised by eagles. And of course, not clothed because she lived with birds. So yeah, princesses are completely random. Say, I know I have Little Wild Rose on my archives. But what's really bad is they got her out of the tree by making her so angry at someone she has to correct them on how they're doing something. It's like an old woman says she can get her out of the tree. Goes over, starts to set up a kettle and a tripod. But she sets the tripod up wrong several times, so that it frustrates the girl enough that she comes down from the tree. And then the woman runs off with her. So, fairy tales. You got some crazy stuff. And I like making sure I can narrate the uncensored versions when I can. Listen, fairy tales really just go all out everywhere. People don't realize how they get sometimes. I might get $2 or $3 every book. Because I think the books I have up right now are maybe around 200 pages or so. Yeah, it's hard to be an author. Amazon, they at least provide the book code number for it. Getting the book code number alone by itself through any other dealer is about $80. I mean, you can technically buy a copy from me that I published through Amazon so I could actually sell myself, but I charge the same price as Amazon. But I also get to autograph the stuff I do, so. The first book is an interesting one. I get a little weirder in starting the second book. Yeah, I do hope you enjoy the book. Like I said, the first one I was, being cautious on. Then when I did the second one the next year, I was about to say, I'm going to add more to it. So I went back and I found out that I based the stories on the order that I originally started streaming the stories. And then I went back over my log and found out that I put them out of order. So I re-added a story to the second book. So yeah, it's all over the place. The third book, I literally started out with child murder. What's an actual Brothers Grimm story that it's children impersonating adults. So, of course, they need someone's wanting to be a butcher, so they needed a victim. So, that's not one of the stories that gets told very often, so of course I have to lead with it. But honestly, it's no worse than Lord of the Flies. Although, that story, I wrote two different versions of. Because one of them, I let everything happen as it did in the story. And then another one, I made it not happen like the story. So, one of them is child murder, one of them is just a horrible fantasy. Well, the original story just kind of ended at a spot. Then they went back and wrote a second version of it. I tried to make it nicer. But again, I don't censor the stories on my stream, so I'm not going to censor the stories in my books. I do need to find someone to read here. Let's see, what's which book reading? The Witcher. Yeah, I have a friend who's... Thank you for the follow. see. Oh, look, the Magical is the only one reading right now. I do fairy tales on Fridays, and I do anything else that comes to mind on Thursdays. Mondays and Tuesdays, I attempt playing video games. By attempt, I mean I hope I play video games and my computer doesn't crash. Well, I've got a decent computer that I had to put together. But I've got a decent video card on it, but I'm still running Generation 14 processor. Okay, I see 2 people I know that are reading right now. Everyone else seems to be playing video games. One of them is reading Witcher. Well, I could play retro games, and I could technically remote into my consoles, but remoting into the consoles gives a lot of delay. I don't have any games that my computer shouldn't be able to handle. It's just that running the programs and running everything else at the same time is what does it. Yeah, OBS, VTube Studio. I could switch over to just doing PNG animations for the games, but I like my expressions. Ads are about to start. Dang it. I have to go ahead and get this raid set it. Oh no, not the ads. Dang it. In 1984, a prestigious talent became the youngest champion in a game of Strategy and Kings. I know it's about chess, but I can't remember what the kid's name is. Okay, let's go ahead and read Dusk. Say, Dusk did my current emote sets. In all honesty, I need to use the bathroom, so hopefully I see you next week if you get to watch the VOD. And yeah, have a good night.